The email was already sent before she finished deleting my files. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I didn't get to. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, while I was driving home from a gas station on South Congress with a lukewarm breakfast taco and the specific brand of exhaustion that belongs only to people who've been staring at Figma prototypes for 16 consecutive hours, someone was in my work folder, clicking, selecting, holding shift, and then, with whatever internal monologue justifies that kind of thing, pressing delete. By the time I got home, opened my laptop, and saw what had happened to 8 months of my life, the email had been sitting in Marcus Webb's inbox for 4 hours and 43 minutes. He just hadn't opened it yet. That detail, the timing, the gap between what she destroyed and what she couldn't reach, is the only reason this story ends the way it does instead of the way it almost did. And I'm going to tell you every part of it, including the parts where I was wrong, and the parts where I was naive, and the one part where I sat in my car in a parking garage at 2 a.m. and genuinely considered quitting the entire industry. But first, let me tell you about a company called Lumen, a colleague named Priya Deshpande, and the very expensive lesson she taught me about what happens when ambition has no ethics to slow it down. Lumen EdTech was the kind of Austin startup that existed in a specific stratum of the ecosystem. Not quite seed stage scrappy, not quite Series B polished, but occupying that turbulent middle space where everyone was exhausted and everyone was performing confidence. We made adaptive learning software for community colleges, which sounds boring until you realize that community colleges serve about a third of all undergraduate students in the United States, and are almost universally under-resourced, underfunded, and overlooked by the kind of venture capital that prefers to fund the 15th app for people who already own iPhones. I believed in the mission. I want to make sure that's on the record, because nothing I'm about to tell you changes that. I joined Lumen as a senior UX designer about 2 years before any of this happened. The office was on the 4th floor of a building off East 6th that smelled faintly of cold brew and ambition, and, on Thursdays for some reason, someone's elaborate lunch. My team was small: 4 designers, 1 researcher, and a product manager named Donovan, who had the extremely useful quality of being genuinely good at his job, while also being just chaotic enough to let you do yours. We reported to Marcus Webb, the VP of product, who had the kind of calm, measured intelligence that made you want to impress him, and the kind of precise expectations that made that want feel achievable. He wasn't warm exactly, but he was fair, which in a startup is often more valuable. Priya Deshpande joined about 9 months after me. I should tell you what Priya was actually like, because this story is not interesting if she's a villain and I'm a hero, and nothing is more complicated than that. She was sharp. Genuinely sharp. The kind where you'd be in a design critique and she'd identify a UX problem in 40 seconds that you'd been circling for a week. She was meticulous about presentation, which sometimes tilted into over-polished at the expense of substance. But it made her work look excellent in stakeholder meetings. She was competitive in the way that people are when they've been told their whole lives that there's one seat at the table with their name on it, and they've started to believe it. I understood that. I didn't like everything that came with it, but I understood the architecture of it. We were friendly for the first 6 months. Not friends, there's a difference, and the difference matters. We went to team lunches. We occasionally commiserated about the particular dysfunction of our sprint planning process. Once, after a very bad product review, we walked to a food truck on Red River and ate elotes in a silence that felt almost companionable. And then the Compass project started, and things got complicated in a way I didn't fully understand until much later. Compass was Lumen's largest initiative in 3 years. The concept, a fully redesigned learner dashboard that would use behavioral data to surface personalized content pathways, flag at-risk students before they disengaged, and give instructors visibility they'd never had before. For a company with our mission, it was the product we were supposed to be building. It was also, from a career standpoint, the kind of project that defines what happens to you next. I was assigned as the lead designer. Priya was not. She was assigned to a parallel initiative, improving the instructor-side interface, which was legitimately important and legitimately complex, and, to be direct about it, legitimately less visible. I know how that reads. I know that my being the one who got the flagship project colors everything I'm about to say. I'm not going to pretend I was a neutral observer to my own promotion. But what I can tell you is that Marcus made the assignments. I didn't lobby for them. And when Priya came to me 2 days later with a look on her face that I couldn't quite read and said, "Should be an interesting year for both of us," I said yes, genuinely meaning it. That was in February. What I didn't know was that by the following October she would try to burn my work to the ground, and what she didn't know was that I'd already handed a copy of it to her boss. Let me take you back to about 6 weeks before everything collapsed, because that's where the thread actually starts if you're looking for it. It was mid-September, a Wednesday, and Austin was doing the thing it does in early fall, where it hasn't decided yet whether it's still summer or not, so it commits to both simultaneously. I'd been at my desk since 7:30, which, for a UX designer working on an 8-month project in month 7, means your judgment is technically functional, but your enthusiasm for feedback has a shorter fuse than it used to. The office air conditioning was set to a temperature that suggested the building's facilities manager had a personal grudge against human comfort, and my third coffee was doing less than the first 2 had promised. I was in the final stretch of the Compass prototype. Not done. Nothing in product design is ever done until someone physically takes your keyboard away. But I was close enough that I could see the shape of completion from where I was sitting. The core learner dashboard was solid. The at-risk flagging logic had been iterated on with our research team until it reflected actual instructor behavior instead of what we assumed instructor behavior looked like. The personalized content pathway UI had gone through 11 rounds of testing with real community college students, and the most recent round had produced the kind of usability data that makes you feel, briefly and dangerously, like you've gotten something right. The launch was scheduled for October 18th. Product demo for investors and college partners. The kind of thing that has a date circled on a calendar in a VP's office. And 6 weeks before that date, I made a decision that was partly professional instinct, and partly, if I'm honest, a low-level anxiety I couldn't name yet. I sent Marcus a progress email. Not unusual. We had standing check-ins, but I wanted to give him a fuller picture than a 30-minute meeting allowed. So I put together a detailed update, current prototype state, outstanding decisions, risk flags, a summary of research findings, and I attached the most recent working version of the prototype file, as a courtesy, as documentation, as the kind of over-communication that people who grew up in chaotic environments develop as a survival mechanism and then deploy professionally without fully realizing it. I titled the email, Compass UX, September, Progress plus Current Prototype Attached. I sent it on September 14th at 2:18 p.m. Marcus replied the next morning. Thanks, Nadia. Looks strong. Keep the momentum. I filed that away and kept working. Now I need to tell you about a meeting in early October that I've replayed in my head more times than I'd like to admit, because it's the point where, if I'd been paying closer attention to what was right in front of me, I might have understood what was happening before it happened to me. It was a product alignment meeting, which is exactly as thrilling as it sounds. About 12 people in the larger conference room, the one with the windows that looked out over a parking structure and, if you craned your neck, a sliver of the downtown skyline. Donovan was running through the October launch timeline. Marcus was there. Priya was there. The engineering leads were there, looking at their laptops in the particular way that meant they were listening while also pretending they might not be. Priya was presenting an update on the instructor side work. Her slides were good. They always were. Visually tight. Well labeled. The kind of deck that reads as confident even before you've absorbed the content. She walked through the instructor dashboard updates, the notification system redesign, the attendance tracking improvements. And then she put up a slide I hadn't seen before. It was a concept. Exploratory, she said, still early. For something she was calling a student momentum view, a panel within the instructor dashboard that would show individualized learner progression data, surfacing patterns before they became problems. My stomach did something. I didn't know what it meant yet. I filed it. "This is still conceptual," she said, clicking her clicker with the practiced calm of someone who's rehearsed their casualness. "I've been developing it alongside the instructor work, wanted to get some early eyes on it. Might be a Q2 roadmap item." Marcus nodded. Asked a clarifying question about data sources. Donovan glanced at me. Just for a second, then looked back at the screen. The meeting ended. People filed out. I stopped in the hallway to check a Slack message, and by the time I looked up, the conference room had mostly emptied. What I didn't do, and this is the fallibility I promised you, the thing I got wrong, was say anything. I looked at that slide, felt the thing my instincts were trying to tell me, and I talked myself out of it. Because she said it was conceptual. Because I didn't want to be the person who cried foul over a vague concept in an alignment meeting. Because I was 7 months deep in my own project and I was tired, and processing a potential problem required energy I was rationing. I told myself, "You're reading into it." I went back to my desk and kept working. 2 weeks later, on the evening of October 17th, one day before launch, I left the office at around 9 p.m. The prototype was done. I'd done a final QA pass that afternoon with 2 engineers. The demo environment was staged. I'd sent a final summary to Marcus and Donovan, confirmed the meeting links, triple-checked the file locations. I was the kind of tired that has graduated past stress into a strange, peaceful exhaustion. The kind where your body knows it's over, even if your brain is still twitching. I drove to a gas station on South Congress, because I'd skipped dinner and the vending machine in our office had been empty since Tuesday, and I was willing, at that point, to eat a gas station breakfast taco with the specific vulnerability of someone who has run out of standards. I ate it in my car, in the parking lot, with the windows down, listening to the ambient noise of South Austin at 9:30 on a weeknight. Someone's dog. A couple laughing somewhere. The low hum of traffic on the elevated section of 35. I remember thinking, tomorrow is going to be a good day. I remember the warmth of that, the simple, tired relief of it. Then I drove home, changed out of my work clothes, opened my laptop to do one final check before I went to sleep, and everything was gone. When I say everything was gone, I want to be precise, because precision is the only thing that kept me functional in the next 3 hours. The Compass Project folder, the one on our shared company drive, the one that housed 8 months of research artifacts, design iterations, prototype files, documentation, user testing recordings, annotated wireframes, component libraries, had been emptied, not reorganized, not moved. The folder existed. It was just hollow. 47 files, reduced to a folder shell with nothing inside it and a modification timestamp of 10:53 p.m. I checked the trash. Empty. I checked version history. The version history showed the folder contents existed as of 6:14 p.m., when I'd last accessed them. Then at 10:53 they were gone. Mass deletion. The access log showed a single user session responsible for the action. The username was not mine. I stared at my screen for what was probably 30 seconds and felt like 30 minutes, in the way that time does when your brain is trying to process something it doesn't have a category for yet. Because there's a specific cognitive dissonance in seeing something catastrophic happen to your work. There's a moment, brief but real, where you simply cannot make it true, where the information sits in front of you and your brain says in all seriousness, I don't accept this. Then I opened my sent emails. September 14th, 2:18 p.m. Compass UX. September progress. Plus, current prototype attached. Marcus Webb, recipient. The prototype I'd attached was 6 weeks old, not the final version, not the polished QA-cleared demo-ready build I'd completed this afternoon, but it was the core architecture, the bones of it, the fundamental design decisions that the final version was built on. And Marcus hadn't opened the email yet, because it was in his inbox from 2 months ago and he'd replied to the summary version, and it had simply stayed there, a digital fossil, underneath everything that had accumulated since. But it was there. I sat with that for a moment. Then I opened a new email, typed Marcus's address, and wrote the most professionally controlled message I have ever composed in my life. Marcus, I need to flag something urgent before tomorrow. The Compass project folder has been deleted from shared drive. I have my September prototype backup and can walk you through the situation first thing in the morning. Are you available at 8 a.m.? I sent it. Then I sat in my desk chair in my apartment in East Austin, with the ceiling fan running and the city quiet outside, and I breathed. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I opened a new folder on my local drive, copied what I had, and started thinking very carefully about the October alignment meeting and Priya's slide, and the thing my instincts had tried to tell me that I'd refused to hear. Here is the question I want you to hold. Why would anyone delete a project the night before its launch? If your goal is sabotage, if you want to blow up the demo, embarrass the team, make your colleague look like they'd lost their work, then yes, the night before launch makes 6 strategic sense. Maximum damage, minimum time to recover. But there's a second possibility, one I didn't fully see yet that night. What if the deletion wasn't about destroying something? What if it was about erasing evidence? I'm going to come back to that. I need you to hold it. Marcus replied to my email at 6:43 a.m. the next morning. Yes, my office, 8 a.m. I'm looking at the drive now. I drove to the office in a state of focused calm that I don't entirely trust in retrospect, the kind that settles over you when you're in crisis, and your body decides that panic is a luxury you'll process later. I wore a blue shirt. I bought a coffee from the cafe downstairs. I told myself, in the elevator, that I had done nothing wrong and the facts were the facts, and the only job right now was to present them clearly. Marcus's office was in the corner of the 4th floor, with windows on 2 sides and the particular orderliness of someone who thinks better in structured spaces. He was already at his desk when I arrived. Donovan was there, which I hadn't expected. So was Lena from HR, which told me that Marcus had moved faster than I'd given him credit for. "Sit down, Nadia," Marcus said. He was in his calm, measured mode, which, I'd learned, was indistinguishable from his upset mode until you'd known him long enough to read the slight tightening around his eyes. "Tell me what happened," I told him. Clearly, in order, without editorializing. The deletion at 10:53 p.m., the access log, the username, the September email still in his inbox with the prototype attached. "Pull it up," he said. I pulled it up on his screen. He looked at the attachment timestamp, the file. He opened it, scrolled through it with the silence of someone confirming something they'd suspected. Then Donovan said quietly, Marcus, you should look at this. He had his laptop open. He turned it to face us. On the screen was a Figma file, Priya's working file for the instructor dashboard, pulled up through our shared workspace. And there, in a branch she'd named Student Momentum View, Concept, was something that made the room go very still. I want to describe it accurately, because accuracy is what I had and what I held on to. The layout was different. The color system was different. The component labels had been renamed, but the logic, the structural decision-making, the information hierarchy, the specific way the at-risk flagging was visualized, the progressive disclosure pattern for the learner pathway cards. It was built on the same foundational architecture as my Compass prototype. Not similar, not parallel evolution. The same. Donovan looked at me. I looked at the screen. Marcus looked at both of us. She wasn't just sabotaging your project, Donovan said. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. This is the moment the story breaks open. And I need you to understand that what broke open wasn't just the situation. It was my understanding of the situation, which is a different and more disorienting thing. Because I'd been operating, until this moment, on the assumption that Priya had deleted my project out of sabotage. Competitive rage, maybe. A desire to see the launch fail, see me fail, see the role and recognition she felt she'd been passed over for collapse in real time. That's a comprehensible motive. It's even, in a painful way, a recognizable one. I'd never have acted on it, but I understood the emotional geography of it. What I had not considered, and what hit me now with the specific weight of a thing that's been true the whole time you were looking elsewhere, was that she had something to lose. Not from my project failing, from my project existing. If Compass launched with the prototype I'd built, and then 6 months or a year later Priya presented her Student Momentum View concept to the team, someone might notice the resemblance. Someone might trace the design decisions back to their origin. Someone might pull up the September prototype in Marcus's inbox, the one time-stamped 3 months before her concept branch was created, and ask a question she couldn't answer. She didn't delete my work to destroy my career. She deleted my work to erase the proof that she'd been building on mine. And when I realized that, something shifted in me that wasn't entirely clean or uncomplicated. Because it wasn't just outrage. It was something older and quieter. The recognition of what she'd actually been afraid of. She'd spent months taking the foundation I'd built and quietly constructing something of her own on top of it. And she'd known, the whole time, that the foundation wasn't hers to take. Let me give you a breath here, because the room needed one and so do you. Lena from HR brought coffee, which I thought was either very considerate or a very strategic move to make the next hour feel less formal. Donovan sat down. Marcus turned his chair to face the room instead of the screen. For a few minutes, nobody was saying anything operational. I looked out the window at the parking structure and the sliver of downtown skyline, and thought about the October alignment meeting, about Priya's clicker, about the practiced calm of her presentation, about the way Donovan had glanced at me when she put up that slide. "You saw it," I said to Donovan. "In the meeting." He exhaled. "I saw something. I didn't have enough to say anything." That's the honest answer. And I respect it, even though part of me, a tired, 7 months deep gas station taco part of me, wished someone had said it out loud anyway. But here's the thing about the almost. Almost isn't blame. Donovan didn't delete my files. Priya did. Those are different things. The next 2 hours were procedural and, in their own strange way, almost soothing. The way that structured processes can be soothing when everything else has been uncontrolled. Marcus initiated a formal HR review. Donovan pulled the full access logs, which documented not just the deletion but a pattern of file access on my project folder stretching back 6 weeks. Priya had been reading my work files regularly. Not her own lane, not shared documents, specifically my Compass prototype iterations. Since mid-September. Since right around the time of the alignment meeting, in other words. I sat through the documentation process in a state of detached precision that I recognized as my own version of self-protection. I answered questions clearly. I provided timestamps. I did not cry, which I mention not to perform stoicism, but because I remember being aware, in real time, that I was choosing not to, and that the choice required more effort than I wanted to admit. At 10 o'clock, Marcus said, "The launch is still happening at 2. I looked at him. "You have the September prototype," he said. "How much of the final version can you reconstruct from it?" "The architecture is all there," I said. "The final version was an iteration on the same structure. I'd need 2 hours for the demo-specific elements." "You have 2.5. I nodded. "Nadia." He paused. "I'm sorry this happened." Marcus Webb did not say things he didn't mean. That was the fact I held as I walked out of his office and sat down at my desk and opened the September prototype and started working. Here's the sensory detail of that morning. The fluorescent hum of the office, which I'd stopped hearing months ago and suddenly heard again. The slight chemical smell of the dry erase markers someone had used on the whiteboard behind me. The specific texture of my keyboard. The slight concavity of the keys from years of use. The way my own hands looked against the white desk surface. Steady, which surprised me. I worked for 2 hours and 22 minutes. I rebuilt what I could, flagged what was missing with honest framing for the demo, documented the reconstruction in real time so there would be a record of it. I am not going to tell you it was the version I would have shown if the night before had gone differently. It wasn't. But it was coherent, and it was mine, and when Donovan came by at 12:30 to check on me, I showed him what I had, and he said, "This is solid," and I believed him. I should tell you what happened with Priya, because you're waiting for it, and because the how of it matters. She came in at 9:30, which was her usual time. I know this because I was at my desk, and I watched her walk in from my peripheral vision without turning my head, the way you track something you've decided not to react to physically. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop. I watched her, in my peripheral vision, go still about 3 minutes later in the specific way that people go still when they open something and find out it's over. She'd been called into a meeting with Marcus, HR, and the company's legal counsel at 10:15. I don't know everything that was said in that room. I know what the outcomes were. I know that the access logs were presented. I know that the comparative file analysis, Donovan's careful, time-stamped documentation of the structural similarities between my Compass prototype and her student momentum view branch, with my September email as the anchor, was part of that presentation. I know that Priya's employment was terminated before noon. I know this because Marcus told me afterward, briefly and without editorializing. What I don't know, and what I've thought about more than once, is what Priya said in that room. Whether she had a justification she believed, whether she understood, in that moment, the full shape of what she'd done, not just the deletion, but the months before it, the quiet accumulation of decisions, the way each small compromise probably felt survivable on its own. I don't know if she was scared or defiant or something more complicated. I think about that. The demo happened at 2 p.m. as scheduled. The room was a mix of investors, partner college administrators, and internal stakeholders. Marcus introduced the Compass project with a few sentences about its development timeline that were factually accurate and also, I noticed, carefully chosen to establish lineage. Donovan ran the AV, I presented. Here is what I remember about standing in that room: the slight dryness of the air, the way the projector made everything look slightly warmer than it actually was, the face of a community college dean from San Antonio who leaned forward when I showed the at-risk flagging visualization and said, quietly, to the person next to her, "We need this." That's what I remember most. Not the revenge, not the drama of the morning. That dean, leaning forward, saying, "We need this." That's what the work was for. Let me tell you the part that took me the longest to say out loud. After the demo, after the follow-up questions, after the room had mostly cleared and I was standing in the hallway with a glass of water, Donovan came to stand next to me and said, "How are you doing?" Actually. I thought about it. "I think I'm angry," I said, "but I don't know exactly what I'm angry at." He nodded, like that made sense. "You did everything right," he said. "I didn't say anything in October," I said, "when I saw her slide. I knew something was wrong and I talked myself out of it." "You weren't sure." "I was something," I said. "Something that wasn't nothing." He was quiet for a second. "That's not the same as what she did." "No," I said, "but it's not nothing either." I want to be precise about this because I think it matters for what this story actually is. I am not the hero of some clean morality tale. I made a choice in October that was about self-protection and conflict avoidance, and not wanting to be the person who made trouble when I might be wrong. Those are understandable reasons. They're also reasons I have to own. The fact that Priya did something much worse doesn't zero out the calculus of what I didn't do. It just puts it in context. In the weeks after October 18th, I had a lot of conversations I hadn't expected to have. I had a conversation with Marcus about documentation practices and shared drive permissions, which resulted in an audit of our entire team's file access protocols. Changes were made. Backup systems were implemented that should have existed already. I had a conversation with Donovan about the October meeting and what both of us had done with what we'd half seen. That conversation was uncomfortable and useful, and exactly the kind of thing that doesn't happen in companies where everyone is performing confidence. I had a conversation with myself, mostly at night, mostly in the particular quiet of my apartment in East Austin, when the ceiling fan was running and I was trying to sort out what I actually felt. Here's what I eventually landed on. I was angry at Priya. Genuinely, completely angry in a way that didn't resolve itself neatly into understanding. I could hold space for the fear and the pressure and the structural conditions that produce people who make the choices she made, and I was still angry. Both of those things were true, and neither one canceled the other. But the thing that stayed with me, the thing that I kept turning over in the weeks after, the thing I'm still turning over honestly, wasn't the anger. It was the particular shape of what she'd done. She didn't just delete my work. She deleted the evidence that the work she was building toward was not originally hers. She tried to erase a record in order to claim a future. And the thing she couldn't reach, the thing that undid all of it, was a courtesy email I'd sent on a September afternoon to a VP who hadn't opened it yet. The backup wasn't a backup in the traditional sense. It was documentation. It was the paper trail that exists when you over-communicate, when you send the update even when you don't have to, when you attach the file because something low and instinctive tells you to. I didn't save my project because I saw what was coming. I saved it because I'm the kind of person who sends too many emails and attaches too many files and treats documentation like a personal coping mechanism. That's my fallibility and my salvation, and they're the same thing. There's a version of this story that ends here, with a tidy moral about documentation and backup systems and trusting your instincts. You can have that version if you want it. It's not wrong. But the version that's actually stayed with me is a little messier, and I think it's the version worth telling. The edtech industry, and I mean this as someone who loves the mission and plans to stay in it, has a specific failure mode. It attracts people who believe in access and equity and the democratization of education, which are real and good things to believe in. And it also creates enormous pressure to prove yourself in environments with limited resources and high visibility. That pressure doesn't excuse what Priya did, but it does explain some of the soil that grew it, the seat at the table scarcity that she'd internalized, the feeling that there was one version of success available, and it was either hers or mine. That wasn't just her personal pathology, it was cultivated. It was the ambient temperature of every company meeting where there was one spotlight and multiple people who'd been told they were exceptional. I'm not going to tell you that structural conditions make individual choices inevitable. They don't. Priya made choices, clear, deliberate choices, over months. She looked at my work, decided to build on it without attribution, and then when the risk of exposure got close enough, she tried to eliminate the evidence. Those were her decisions and she owns them. But the hunger underneath those decisions, the I have to win because losing here means losing everything hunger, that didn't come from nowhere. And the companies that keep generating that hunger, that keep telling talented people there's one seat and no room for collaboration, are going to keep generating outcomes like this one. Not as extreme, usually, but the same shape. I'm still at Lumen. Compass launched and it's working. Not perfectly. Nothing works perfectly. But the dean from San Antonio's college implemented it in January and sent us a data report in March that made Donovan actually tear up in a team meeting, which he will deny if you ask him. My documentation practices are still excessive. Marcus has never complained about this. I think about Priya sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. When I'm in a meeting and I see someone tighten when credit is being distributed, when I notice the particular calculus behind someone's eyes as they process whether a colleague's success diminishes their own, I think about the distance between the fear and the action, about how many decisions exist in that distance, about the fact that the fear is usually more understandable than the action, and the action is still the action. She didn't delete my work. She deleted her own alibi. And the thing that gets me, still, late at night, when the ceiling fan is running and Austin is quiet outside, the thing that doesn't resolve into a lesson or a takeaway or a moral for the end of a YouTube video, is this: she was building something real. Underneath all the compromise and the taking and the fear, she had a design instinct that was genuinely sharp. The student momentum view was a good concept. If she'd come to me in March or April, or any of the months she was quietly building it from the bones of my work, and said, I've been thinking about the at-risk visualization differently. Can we collaborate? It might have been better than what either of us built alone. That's the thing I can't shake. Not the deletion. The collaboration that never happened, and all the reasons it didn't. And whose fault that is. And whether fault is even the right frame. She could have asked. She didn't ask. And I will never know whether she didn't ask because she was afraid I'd say no, or because she'd already decided that taking was faster than asking, or because some part of her had stopped believing that asking was something people like her got to do. I don't get to know that. None of us do. What I know is this. The email was already sent before she finished deleting my files. The backup was already sitting in her boss's inbox, 4 hours and 43 minutes old, growing more relevant by the minute. She didn't know that. She couldn't have known that. And I think about what it means that the thing that saved me was something I did for no particular reason, on an ordinary September afternoon, before I had any idea there was anything to be saved from. And I'm still not sure if that's luck or habit, or something that doesn't have a name yet but that I intend to keep doing for the rest of my career. Document everything. Attach the file. Send the email. and never ever assume that the folder will still be there in the morning.